Yeah, in theory, it's like give you a chance to intercept if something like crazy happens.
Right.
But then we also have a person with content. And then for recording this here, putting it in 3 different spots.
Okay.
Ideally, they shall be in higher quality than last year.
That would be
They
ideal.
are.
Yeah, that would be good. And then
So-
also, yeah, because then we're good for the videos that we have to do for them.
grab this in a sec. Or is you copy? I don't have it, but you can just copy it. Okay, sounds that's good in here. We'll just test all the mics, make sure they're mixing properly. Sounds that's good in here. We'll just test all the mics, make sure they're mixing properly. Behind. Okay, mic number 2. Give it up for number 2. Okay, wait 30 seconds, we'll find out. Mic number 2.
So it is mic number 3. There's a podium mic. Hopefully it picks up well on the stream as well. This is mic number 3. There's a podium mic. Hopefully it picks up well on the stream as well.
Sure does. Yeah, it's 30 seconds.
And yeah, or this side recording is going on.
Yeah. That's okay. That happens sometimes, but it's okay. I think it's fine.
Okay. And this one also sounded fine under too, right?
You're welcome.
It's just gonna be, if you exit this door, go all the way around and then to the left.
It's like right next to the elevators.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Okay, let's turn these guys off. Sounds great.
Hello? Is it okay? Oh, I think it's okay. Right, okay, great. Excellent. Hello, and welcome, everyone, to this year's SFU 2026 3-Minute Thesis Finals. My name is Mary O'Brien. I'm the Vice Provost and Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies. Before we officially begin, I'd like to acknowledge the importance of starting this event in a good way. Whether you're joining us in person or online, it is my honor to introduce Elder Scholar Dr. Richard Vidan, who will begin our event. Dr. Vidan, a member of the Nisconlith Band of the Secwepemc First Nation, has been a long-standing guide and supporter of Indigenous education and the Reconciliation Council. Guided by elders and knowledge holders, his work has helped advance Indigenous education, reconciliation, and ethical leadership across SFU. With a lifetime of experience as a scholar, educator, social worker, and public speaker, Dr. Vidan has dedicated his work to translating complex knowledge into stories that bridge understanding and meaningful connection beyond the academy. Please join me in welcoming Elder Scholar Dr. Richard Vidan.
We Kwalkasaltan, Shuswapan request Chechaliches. Cookstamp for that very kind introduction. Being prudent, I would just take my seat and not say anything further, but thank you very much. I am from the Shuswapam territory, but my great-grandfather, Johnny Peters, was from this territory, so we have relatives, and I do acknowledge we're inhabitants. We're together in Coastal Salish territory. I want to say a few words to give thanks for the gifts of this day, for the gifts of the four directions, for safe journeys here. I want to acknowledge those who will be doing the presentations. I want to acknowledge the work that has all been put into this day, in this place, in this time. All of the all-nighters, all of the anxious waiting for the letters of admission and the marks to come in, and also for the families. Any study these days, particularly graduate studies degree, is a family project. My wife Barbara and I are both alumni of Simon Fraser. I want to give words of prayers for the healthcare workers, the first responders, all those who are taking care of the rest of us. And for all those in harm's way. Those in harm's way within the sound of our voices here, those in harm's way in far too many places. The information we'll be sharing and hearing to get to the point in the time available, it's not just a cognitive exercise, it's a holistic exercise where I'm sure you're breathing every syllable, every consonant, every punctuation. So it's holistic. It's an intellectual, emotional, spiritual, physical exercise. And at this time, this unsettled time, to come together to celebrate the sharing ideas, the sharing of information in a respectful, authentic, empathetic way is very important. I've learned that there's duality in all things. Water, the lifeblood of Mother Earth. We need it to live, we need it to thrive. Unless it's coming in the form of an atmospheric river. And then we need to get things back and down. It's the same as with the information we be sharing. There'll be people coming out of the big houses who've been in ceremony, and there are going to be others going in, looking for their talents. And the tradition has been not just for all people, is that you acknowledge to the community that you have the talents and the skills and abilities. But moreover, you also acknowledge that you can do harm or you can do good with that. To doing good. To the judges, I'm glad I'm not I'm going to age myself by saying this is the time when you put on your thinking cap. Then you know, I'm going to buckle up my cognitive seatbelt because I don't want to get synaptic whiplash. Cook Stamp, I look forward to sharing on my relations.
Thank you kindly, Dr. Elder Dr. Vidan. Here's to doing good. I'd like to remind everyone to please turn your phones onto silent if they're not already silenced, because we want to make sure that we can really focus on the students. So for those of you already familiar with the 3MT, welcome back. And to those of you joining us for the first time, you're in for a treat. This academic competition was originally created in Australia's University of Queensland and has expanded globally to over 95 countries. And it's about making complex research accessible to a wide-reaching audience. Before I begin, I'd like to share just a bit about the team. Events like this don't happen without a great deal of work behind the scenes. In the case of the 3MT, this includes a small but mighty team. First, I'd like to introduce Charity Slobod, who has been involved in months of preparation and coordination, working with all of the students really closely to ensure that they're ready for tonight. I'd also like to thank you, Charity. I'd also like to thank and it's the students who are especially grateful to you. Thank you, Charity. I'd also like to thank Stacy McCordoff and Yayu Tan for their outstanding communications work. And for the beautifully executed 3MT design layouts. And I'd also like to thank Stephanie Santoso for her support during the event. She will be expertly keeping the time at tonight's event. Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to thank these three individuals and all of you for all of the care and the collaboration that you've provided in supporting our students and for being here tonight as they connect their research to the broader community. Now, as audience members, your role is to listen, to enjoy, to learn, to vote, and most importantly, to cheer on these outstanding graduate students as they share their hard work. And presenters, you already know your role. You must explain the impact of your research using only one PowerPoint slide and only 180 seconds to tell your story. That's tough. I imagine myself doing this and I think, I don't think I could do it. I don't know. And not as well as they do, that's for sure. Currently, we're all navigating a world that feels increasingly complex and challenging. And moments like this remind us that the work we do matters. By distilling thousands of hours of research into clear, compelling stories, these students highlight not only the what and the why of graduate studies, but also how knowledge can inspire hope and contribute to meaningful change. Through the work of graduate students at SFU, we can see how research makes a difference for British Columbia, while also engaging with global challenges to make our home and our world a better place. Before I pass the stage over to our finalists, I'd like to introduce our three esteemed 3MT judges. So I'd like to encourage each of you to stand up and give a little wave as I introduce you. I'd like to begin with Pamela Saunders, who is the site director for Microsoft's R&D campus in Vancouver and a proud SFU alumna. With over 25 years of experience in corporate communications, she joined Microsoft in 2016 to help shape regional investment through collaborative partnerships. Pamela now leads site strategy and employee engagement with a strong focus on positioning British Columbia's tech ecosystem as a global leader. She's also a committed advocate for community-driven innovation and serves on several regional and national innovation councils. Thank you for joining us, Pam. Mary Ann Middleton is a hydrogeologist and water resources professional with a Bachelor of Science and PhD in Earth Sciences from Simon Fraser University. Her doctoral research advanced our understanding of groundwater and surface water connections and informed groundwater policy in British Columbia. A fun fact about Mary Ann: during her PhD, she competed in SFU's inaugural 3-minute thesis competition in 2013 and advanced to the semifinals. She now serves as Chief Partnerships and Growth Officer at a Canadian-owned environmental consulting firm where she supports water resources planning, compliance, and strategic growth. Thanks for joining us, Mary Ann. And Alicia Main is Simon Fraser University's Associate Vice President, Knowledge Mobilization and Innovation, W.J. Van Dusen Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and the Director of the National I2I Research and Innovation Institute. A leader in advancing Canadian innovation, Alicia cares deeply about the translation of university research to benefit society. She founded the award-winning Invention to Innovation, or I2I program, which supports STEM researchers in becoming entrepreneurs and shaping Canadian innovation. The National I2I network now spans Canada with over 500 alumni and partners, including NSERC, MyTax, and over 70 organizations. Thank you, Alicia. Now to our finalists, who have already won their designated faculty or FGS wildcard heats. They are competing for 3 prizes. The runner-up, the winner of SFU finals, and the People's Choice Award. Whether you're here at the Surrey campus or watching online, you will have the opportunity to vote for your favorite presenter. So you'll get a QR code later on to place your vote. So don't, even though you have your phone silenced, make sure they're not too far away because you'll have the opportunity to vote. Okay, so for today's event, I will introduce the finalists in groups of 5 and then the final group of 4. There will be a minute pause between each presenter to give our judges the time to complete their scorecards. Applause is welcome, but please hold any questions you might have for the presenters until the break. The questions come at their thesis defense. Anyway. After the presentations, you, the audience, will have the opportunity to vote for the winner of the People's Choice Award and to enjoy some light refreshments in the atrium. This will also be a great time to speak with the students about their research while our judges deliberate and to determine the top 2 winning presentations. Are we ready? Okay. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the first group of presenters. We have Erin Fairley from Geography with a presentation entitled How River Width Controls Sediment Movement. We have Tomos Land from Political Science with a presentation entitled Line of Fire, the Interconnected Nature of Biodiversity and National Security. Maggie Koo from the School of Criminology with a presentation titled Understanding Perceptions of AI Psychosis on Reddit. Zara Hawili from Public Policy with a presentation entitled Cradles or Careers, Closing the Fertility Gap in British Columbia. And the last presenter in this first group of 5 is Grace Johnson from Physics with a presentation entitled Formation of Permafrost Sorted Stripes in the Canadian High Arctic. Let's begin by welcoming Erin.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be Alice down in Wonderland and you find a piece of cake on the ground that says, "Eat me," and you grow so large that trees look like broccoli and lakes look like puddles? Well, I actually think about it often because I study rivers with canyons where water is very fast and very deep. It would be a much more accessible workplace if I could just grow like Alice and wade right through them. But luckily, I'm going to tell you exactly how I get to do that in my research today. But first, why do we care about how rivers work? Well, they're actually the artists of entire landscapes, sculpting statues out of mountains across our planet. And they do so not just with the flowing water in them, but also with their sediment. This is the sand, gravel, and boulders. The way these particles move and erode at the river's boundaries are what ultimately can create things like wide valleys and deep canyons. And this is what a lot of river research is after. Modeling how sediment moves can tell us how Earth's terrain is evolving over eons of time. But many models neglect natural variability. For example, river width expands and contracts repeatedly, creating distinct wide and narrow segments with lots of wiggles in between. And this is what I'm questioning. How does that width variability affect how sediment moves, especially in rivers with narrow canyons? So, like Alice's imagination created a whole world, I created a river in something called a flume. I was able to build 2 wide reaches with a narrow canyon in the middle, and I changed how much that canyon width wiggled. I also controlled how much water was flowing through, and I fed sediment from the upstream end to mimic a real river. And what I found is that width has a very strong influence on how sediment moves. Width has a very strong influence on how sediment moves. Width has a very, these 2 3D images of my canyon. On the left, we have straight walls with a very simple uniform bed of sediment. And on the right, we have, where I introduce more wiggles, we see the sediment is dramatically reorganized. Tighter areas speed up flows and carve deep pools. And tighter areas speed up flows and carve deep pools, pushing sediment out and away to find slower, more comfortable water in the wider spaces. It's these deep pools where the river may cut down more and more over time. I was also able to show how one reach communicates with one another, creating a sort of downstream domino effect, where the wide upstream reach grew storage and raised its sediment bed, and this allowed the downstream canyon reach to do the same. So through this journey into my own wonderland, we see that the sediment not only creates the river shape, but the river shape directs the sediment's path. And it is this reciprocal relationship that over very long periods of time tells us when, where, and how rivers are cutting down through Earth's terrain. Yeah, I totally lost track of what I was saying in the middle because it was like my guide. I feel bad. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Hello? Can I just wait for the slide? Can I get my slide up? This isn't it. Okay. What does cyber warfare and conservation have in common? How about nature and nuclear warheads? Or even biodiversity and battlefields? In 2026, each of these issues are national security concerns, with biodiversity loss at the top of the agenda when intelligence agencies, government ministers, and military officials meet to discuss the biggest threats facing our countries. Understanding the risk that biodiversity loss poses to our habitats, humanity, and health is of great societal relevance. Consequently, my research asked two key questions. Firstly, to what extent are the consequences of biodiversity loss considered within national security agendas? And secondly, what obstacles are preventing action on biodiversity loss from taking place? To answer these questions, I will be conducting a comprehensive review of the academic and grey literature, followed by interviews with key stakeholders, including diplomatic, military, and political personnel. This two-step approach will allow me to gauge an understanding of not only the prevalence of conservation considerations within national security agendas, but also how they are being acted upon. By researching existing efforts to mitigate the impact of biodiversity loss, my research will gauge the sense of urgency with which governments are seeking to address a potentially cataclysmic sequence of events. Just recently in January, the UK government published a national security assessment which stated that nature is the foundation of our national security. The cascading risks of ecosystem degradation, it continued, includes crop failures, increased competition for resources, and geopolitical insecurity. Biodiversity loss also threatens ecosystem services, such as food, water, and clean air. The negative impact on these services will lead to an increase in natural disasters, zoonotic diseases, and extreme weather events. Examples including the 2011 Somali famine, Hurricane Katrina, and the COVID pandemic prove just how costly impacts on these services can and will be. Clearly, preventing ecological collapse will be one of the greatest challenges of our time. Understanding the risks that biodiversity loss poses not only to the nature that we derive so much enjoyment from, but also the benefits that it brings to our individual and collective health is of paramount importance. By embedding conservation considerations, international security agendas, and recognizing the risk that these losses pose to our individual health and livelihoods is a fundamental first step in halting and reversing this decline. Thank you very much.
I want you to think about the last time you had a thought you were too scared to say out loud. Maybe it was too embarrassing or too personal, but what did you do with those thoughts? Now, a while back, a friend of mine actually told me that she liked to talk to ChatGPT when she was having a bad day. She would use it as a sort of digital journal to unpack her feelings. And when I first heard this, I didn't think it was all that uncommon. However, with rising concerns surrounding AI and privacy, I started digging into current policies. And what I found was numerous news articles talking about individuals going through so-called AI psychosis after developing close personal friendships with their own large language models. A lot of their stories would start off very similarly, with casual conversations that turned into something much more sinister. A lot of them would talk about being stuck in a sort of feedback loop, one that constantly reassured them that what they were doing was the right thing. With AI being so much more accessible now, more and more people are using it as a sort of mental health tool. After all, professional help is extremely expensive and also extremely hard to access. Sometimes people just really need someone to talk to, and AI does an excellent job of filling in that gap. ChatGPT only launched in late 2022. However, experts are already warning us on the potential dangers of long-term AI use on our mental health. However, to address these concerns, we first need to understand the conversation happening online surrounding this topic already. To do so, my study takes Reddit threads from 11 different subreddits. Once the data was collected, I conducted a qualitative thematic analysis using Clark and Braun's framework. A total of 5 major themes were identified, however, 2 stood out. The first was the need to define AI psychosis, and the second was concerns surrounding our over-reliance on AI for emotional support. The online community largely agreed that AI psychosis is not yet a medical diagnosis. This means that more research needs to be done in order to define this condition so that interventions can happen. Users who've claimed to go through AI psychosis also talked about the reassuring aspect of AI as one that encouraged their delusions, so any future safeguards should be made to address this concern specifically. Now, why is this research important? Well, earlier this year, a very tragic mass shooting took place in Tumbler Ridge, BC, and the family of one of the victims is actually suing OpenAI. The lawsuit claims that the company knew that the user was mentally unwell and using their software to plan a violent attack, yet they did not notify local authorities. This is just one very, very extreme example. However, it is one that highlights the potential dangers of unregulated AI use. The conversations surrounding AI and privacy are already taking place online. My research just brings it into focus so that scholars are able to start making policies built from real experiences. Thank you.
I don't know how many of you remember, but 15 years ago, there was genuine concern that we're going to be overpopulating the Earth, that this will lead to environmental degradation, scarcity of natural resources, among other disparities. Ironically, today, we seem to be facing the opposite demographic problem. To put it in the most basic of terms, people are not having as many babies as they used to. Now, you might ask, isn't that a good thing? Are we not balancing things out? Not quite. Let's take Canada as an example. To meet the replacement levels of our aging population, we should be averaging about 2.1 children per woman. Currently, we are considered part of the ultra low in terms of our fertility, with British Columbia by far the lowest from across Canada at 1 child per woman. Now, the consequences of low fertility are an aging population that will put more strain on our social services, including our healthcare systems, labor shortages, ongoing pressures, economic pressures, and further reliance on immigration. Now, I'm not interested in promoting pronatalist policies and encouraging everybody to have more babies. Nope. I am interested in the fertility gap, which is the difference between the ideal or desired number of children a woman wishes to have and the actual number of children she ends up having. This is understudied in Canada. So my research asks, what are the factors that are contributing to this fertility gap in British Columbia? I conducted a survey looking at mothers with at least one biological child and assessed on various variables, including immigration status, employment, unpaid work, childcare access, and other social conditions. In my sample of 80 mothers, on average, most of them indicated they'd like to have 3 children, but most actually end up closer to 2. Now, this one fertility gap might seem small, but it's actually quite significant because it means that even among women who are choosing to have children, they're not reaching their ideal family size. This is due to not personal choice, but external pressures. My analysis looks at this as the primary reason behind this being structural barriers, structural constraints, which are the primary reasons why people are not having additional children. The way to combat this and look at it is to really see what is the main issue. The primary reason is that women are not able to balance between having children and meeting their caregiving needs and also being employed. So, how do we move forward? Well, policies. Policies need to be made more inclusive so that we're helping mothers better balance these things out. Now, as a mother myself of 2 young children, I know this will help individual families, but it'll also help our overall population by contributing to a healthier, sustainable, and thriving one. Thank you.
We Vancouverites pride ourselves on our nature. But have you ever been on a hike or even going for a walk through your neighborhood and noticed some weird patterns? Tree bark maybe, or cracks in a patch of dried up mud? Have you ever wondered why nature likes to organize itself like this, or how these patterns might develop through time? Turns out they're not just cool to look at. They hide a rich history of the landscape and clues as to how it will evolve. For the past 2 years, I've been obsessed with patterns in the Arctic, particularly these weird things called sorted stripes. Sorted stripes are these long, almost linear, 3-dimensional features where the hill material has organized itself by grain size. We see compact, dark-colored regions of fine-grained sediment and lighter-colored stripes made up of larger stones. Now, even though we see patterns like this all across the Arctic, we don't yet know how they're going to evolve and what that could mean for the local environment. That's where the geophysicists like me come in. But how exactly do we go about solving a complex problem like this? Well, the first step is to go into the field. Seems simple, right? Yeah, I thought so too. But this is the problem with being an Arctic geophysicist. Going up to a field site is a real logistical nightmare, and camping for 2 weeks on a cold, windy, uninhabited polar desert island, it's not super glamorous, especially if you're like me and you're camping for the first time ever. Because of this, there's a really limited number of studies done on patterns like this. We know basically nothing about them because high-resolution data just hasn't ever existed. No one's gone to collect it, until now. My research takes us all the way up to Devon Island in the Qikiqtani region of northern Nunavut, where we use drone and backpack lidar technology to collect high-quality elevation data of a hill covered in sorted stripes. With such high resolution, we're able to actually see the individual grains forming the patterns. With this topography data, alongside measurements of things like soil moisture and temperature, we're able to map all the individual stripes and perform analyses on them to investigate how things like shape, size, or spacing vary across the hill. This characterization is a crucial first step in informing a physics-based model of sorted stripe pattern formation. Without it, we would have no benchmarks to guide us on what a model should be able to reproduce. we'd be modeling something without even knowing what the something is. My work aims to use this physical model alongside high-resolution field data to unlock the history of Arctic landscapes. With this history, we can begin to address how patterns like this, which are seen all across the Arctic and Antarctic, might respond to our continuously changing climate and what that could mean for the future of our polar environments. Thank you.
Test. Flexibility, something we all learn. So just a quick note, Erin's slide was not available, but will be available. So Erin will go again at the very end. Okay, so we'll just start fresh at the end, at the very end though. Okay, on to our next 5 presenters. Ayush Mukherjee from Mathematics Education with a presentation entitled The Artist's Math Education. Deborah Vera from Graduate Liberal Studies with a presentation entitled Making Out of Mind, Life Writing, Memory, and the Cryptic Puzzle of Dementia. Nima Tehrani from Molecular Biology and Biochemistry with a presentation entitled What Your Neighborhood Has to Do with the Flu. Jonas Eschenfelder from Earth Sciences with a presentation entitled In the Arctic, Timing is Everything. And Rosa Anza Burgess from Arts Education with a presentation entitled Invisible Bodies.
In front of you are 2 triangles. The textbook triangle has 3 lines, Well, 3 intersecting lines and a big plane, and I'm already quite confused. The artist's triangle is fuzzy and obscene, and when on the screen, it walks. When I show it to people, they say, "This triangle walks," and then they stand up and then they show me how it walks. One student says, "This triangle is doing a little dance." Another student says, "When the triangle walks, so can I." Listen to these words. They are telling you that even when math excludes you, you can still find some wonder in it, some intrigue in it. Perhaps the greatest mistake that we make as math educators is that we treat young students as scientists that will discover or explore the world. Instead, let's treat our students as young artists who want to create mathematical worlds. The Indian philosopher Rabindranath Tagore tells a little girl a story. In the story is a tiger who wants to wash off his stripes with soap. The little girl is delighted. The tiger seems as real to her as her own 2 hands. If I tell you stories of walking triangles, will the triangle become as real to you as your own 2 hands? Will math just become fantastic storytelling? My research asks, how should we teach math if we are fantastic storytellers teaching young artists? And immediately I have a problem. I'm studying young artists. I can't remain a scientist myself. I must become an artist too. My methods must borrow from that of painters and architects and musicians. I must sketch my students as they are drawing triangles. And I must listen to the sounds of their gasps and giggles in the classroom. And I must construct elaborate mathematical worlds with them. Right now, I'm constructing a coherent artistic methodology that math teachers and math education researchers can take into their classrooms. I take these methods to my own math classrooms, where they allow me to ask really silly questions. Questions that are nevertheless of deep importance to math and math education. Questions that teach us over and over again that math is not out there or given to us, but is something that we construct ourselves. Last year, I asked, can you study math and not become a math student? You might be really surprised by the answer. This year, I'm asking, can a triangle left alone for too long suddenly become a square? You should ask me next year what my answer is. My research often engages these fuzzy and obscene concepts and identities and questions, but through it all, it keeps reminding me that I have to create some possibility, just some space for the artist's math education. Thank you.
Muddled copier prints are what the doctor ordered. If you too have been down the deliciously time-wasting rabbit hole that is the world of cryptic crosswords, you might have realized that the word muddled could be a hint that the words adjacent to it need to have their letters rearranged. An anagram for copier prints. Crisp protein? Sonic tripper? Let's look to the rest of the clue. What the doctor ordered could be a definition of the word we're looking for. Prescription! That's it. When we were moving my mother into a dementia care home, I found scores of completed cryptic crosswords next to her bed. Ironic, as I had heard that crosswords were supposed to ward off dementia, like garlic to vampires. A few years on, and my research project is a creative memoir housed in the form of a cryptic crossword puzzle. So it's not your typical academic research paper. Rather, it's an experiment in how we tell the stories of those who may have difficulty in telling their own, asking how form, the way we structure our content, can shine new light on all that content holds. I've chosen a form that is purposefully puzzling, that plays with the breakdown of words, that allows for a kind of communication that is, well, cryptic. Stories of the dementia experience are often told from a caregiver's perspective. After all, language and memory, so vital to memoir, are precisely what dementia attacks. However, this means that the voice of the person living with dementia is not foregrounded. I've chosen to include my mother's voice. The etymology of dementia is out of mind. So, who is speaking when she speaks? How does she understand her I, her sense of self? And what part of that I is her, is seated in me, in us, in our family, in South Africa, that beautifully devastating country of South Africa that has a sometimes demented relationship with its own past? Dementia is a puzzle that we're all going to have to solve at some point in our lives. According to the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, 1 million people will be living with dementia by 2030 in this country. Biomedicine is vital in providing appropriate care. Qualitative research understands that we are not just a menagerie of organs, but that we are shaped and that we shape our stories. The arts get into the crevices of human experience. They extract that goo of our poetic being and bring it into the light. They remind us that we are creative, connected, and sometimes cryptic, and that this has to be a part of our creeds of care. Thank you.
Have you and a friend ever been in a situation where you were both exposed to the same virus, yet your friend barely notices that they're sick, and meanwhile you are completely bedridden with symptoms? Well, in cases like this, the differences in your response are often due to differences in your genetics, your immune system, and even your lived experience. We've had a lot of research over the years that telling us what puts us more at risk of getting a severe illness, helping us better understand the situation with you and your friend. But wouldn't it be nice to know these risks in all contexts, even on a much larger scales? Because if individuals respond differently to the same virus, can we apply the same idea when we look at entire cities? With each city containing varying demographics, climates, and even social structures that influence the way a city behaves, I make the argument that, just like humans, cities are also biologically unique. So to set the stage, we need a way to measure the health of a city. What is the nasal swab equivalent of seeing how sick a city is? That's where we can turn to something called wastewater surveillance. When people are sick, every flush down the drain contains fragments of viral genetic material that scientists can use to track when infections are rising in our communities, sometimes even before hospitals see a surge in new patients. The thing with wastewater surveillance, however, is that it only tells us when viruses are entering our communities, but it doesn't explain why the same virus arrives earlier in some, peaks harder in others, and disappears faster elsewhere. So my project takes messy wastewater data and allows us to pinpoint the start and peak dates at which diseases arrive in our communities. And my project bridges these key features back to the many different sociological and environmental factors that give cities their unique identities. And by bridging these things together, we can start to holistically understand what aspects of a city influences the way diseases spread through it. And at its core, my project is identifying the factors in cities across Canada that make cities more vulnerable to earlier or stronger outbreaks, two of the greatest challenges for public health preparedness. And so by understanding what makes cities more vulnerable to more severe or earlier outbreaks, our public health officials could better effectively approach future diseases. This could be through the means of the reallocation of medical resources and staff ahead of time, the creation of new public health policies that could be specific to the needs of a city, and thirdly, this could potentially predict the outcomes of future diseases in our communities. Because just as biological differences between us shape how our bodies react to the same virus, the social and environmental makeup of a city shapes how outbreaks unfold. Because remember, for the virus, the neighborhood matters just as much as the people do. Thank you.
I love spring. The warming air, first sunshine after 5 p.m., cherry blossoms everywhere. But most of all, I just love watching nature around us slowly wake from its cold winter slumber. And this really reminds me of the Arctic, which is undergoing its own sort of spring right now. You see, the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the globe, and with it, landscapes, polar deserts that have been unchanged for the last 11,000 years are waking up and beginning to form new river systems. This provides a unique opportunity to observe the earliest stages of landscape evolution and the formation of new ecosystems. There's just one problem. The Arctic is not behaving how we expect it to. In cold regions on Earth, the ground is frozen for most of the year. And as geoscientists, we expect that ice to act as a sort of glue, holding the landscape together and slowing down erosion. But we've now seen new rivers form within tens of years, much faster than we would expect, even in temperate landscapes where erosion can happen year-round. So clearly we are missing something about the fundamental processes that are driving erosion when ice gets involved. This is where my work comes in. Locked in a cold, dark basement lab, I built my own little Arctic stream. And by zooming in all the way to little sand grains hopping along the riverbed, I was able to identify a new process with which the ice in the ground actually increases erosion rates up to 10 times compared to unfrozen rivers. So equipped with this new knowledge, we set off north to Talarutut, the largest uninhabited island in the world. Here, our objective was simple: set up some monitoring stations and observe beautifully unique landscapes. But despite visiting a polar desert in the winter, we were met with a frigid rainstorm. This made the trip much wetter and less comfortable than I expected, but it also taught us a really important lesson. It showed us that it is these extreme weather events, heat waves and rainstorms, that drive landscape change in the Arctic. And it showed us that it's not just the size of the event that matters, it is also its timing in the fall season, with early season events being the most important to how the landscape will evolve. So taken together, the little sand grains in the basement and the Arctic rain tell us a new story of how the North is changing. They tell us how ice can help, not just hinder erosion. They tell us that extreme weather drives change. And they tell us that in the Arctic spring, timing is everything. Thank you.
In ballet, the body is pulled upwards. Sternum to sky, extension, flight. These gestures were designed centuries ago to show who held power. An open chest meant righteousness, and this, the turnout position, meant power and grace. The ideal body in ballet is sculpted by the way that it looks a certain way, by the way that it moves a certain way, and it belongs to a certain world. I am relearning ballet as an immigrant in Vancouver, and we don't often think about the effect of immigration in a body. My migrant body is shaped by labor, by displacement, and by being read as somebody who doesn't belong. The traditional conventions in ballet has decided what the ideal body is, and it's also decided what my body is not. It is not feminine enough, not quiet enough, not graceful enough. It sees right past me as if I am invisible, that I'm not to take up space when I'm waiting on tables or when I have a seat on the table. My research asks what happens when a body that's shaped by labor is asked to stand tall, open the chest, and reach higher. I'm using ballet as an artistic and embodied method of inquiry, not to teach dancers, not to perform on stage, but to investigate. What changes when a migrant body that is not meant to fit in ballet engages with it? I am working with the immigrant community in Vancouver, and I use ballet to bring awareness to the migrant body. And we discover that the act of pulling the self higher allows us to see ourselves, feel our bodies, and it is through this that we become visible. This is the turning point for me, because most immigrants engage in low-paying, back-breaking labor, that it diminishes the sense of self and how we primarily use our bodies. Each of us are migrants in our bodies. when we are not connected to our body. So I'm going to ask each of you to sit taller, pull your spines higher, and feel that when we engage in art, movement, and embodiment, we physically and metaphorically reach from sternum to sky. Thank you.
All right. And now on to our final 5 presenters. They are Negar Razagi from Sustainable Energy and Engineering with a presentation entitled What Canada's Emission Data Gets Wrong Every Winter. Sandra Bahrami from Mechatronic Systems Engineering with a presentation entitled Optimizing Motion Sensors to Survive Impacts. Stella Lin from Biological Sciences with a presentation entitled Keeping the Town Warm, the Search for Cold Climate Supermicrobes. Jeremy Chu from Applied and Computational Mathematics with a presentation entitled Identifying a Cohort of Patients Experiencing Homelessness from Electronic Medical Records. Then we'll take a tiny break while we load the slide again for Erin Fairley from Geography with a presentation entitled How River Width Controls Sediment Movement.
Test. Most of us in Canada have experienced very cold winter morning. It's minus 20 degrees Celsius, and half of the city is warming up their car, and the other half are deciding to stay home and work remotely. Well, the emission, so every exhaust plume, every road changes, or every congestion ahead, the emission inventory is supposed to account for that, but it does not. So these inventories track emissions from all of the sectors, including transportation. The thing is that they are built on one assumption, and that is a normal and standard condition. But when the temperature drops below minus 15 degrees, 2 things change. First is that the engine and catalytic converter, the part that filters the exhaust of your car, will take longer to warm up so that they dump more emission to the environment comparing to what baseline models estimate. And the second thing is that the physics of the city changes. So we might move differently on the road with lower speed, or there might be a congestion on the road ahead, or we might even avoid some of the roads. So the current models capture none of these impacts. My research focuses on building a framework that can capture this impact. So I start with MOVES. It's a common software used by regulators across North America, and I extend it in 2 steps. First, I will use any cold climate measurement data from tailpipe of one car engine at sub-zero temperature, and I correct the emission math in this software. And the second part, I will use machine learning to predict volume and speed of every street
across city of Edmonton, which is my case study, and because every road segments and how much emission they have, it's very depending on the volume and speed of the vehicles on that road segment. That's how, combining these two, I will have a realistic emission that reflects the cold climate impact. Why do I care about this emission value? Well, this is an input to many important models downstream. The air pollution dispersion models use this input to tell us how the emission disperses. And the health impact assessments use the results of these models to tell us how much pollution we are exposed to. And if we have error or underestimation on capturing the impact of cold weather, snow or ice on the road, then we're making those models to inherit this error. And we don't want that to happen in Canada that spends half a year in cold climate. So my research does not change the climate, but it changes how we plan and estimate the emissions so that the next time the city wakes up to a cold morning, we're not underestimating the emission of transportation. Thank you.
Please raise your hands if you've ever dropped your cell phone on the floor. Quite a few. Hidden inside the phone is an array of tiny motion sensors that tells the phone which way is up, how far you've moved, and how fast you've moved. Inside that sensor, there is a little mass suspended on 4 flexible springs, also known as beams. When you accelerate, the mass moves and the beams bend. This movement indicates a physical event, like you rotated the phone, or you've just hit an obstacle. That sensor might be quite smaller than a Canadian quarter, but in a hard impact, it can feel forces hundreds of times stronger than gravity. These forces can definitely cause damage to the sensor. We usually build these sensors out of a material called silicon. Silicon is a great, versatile material that has enabled us to fabricate lots of electronic components that shape our modern way of life. It just comes with a price. Silicon behaves a bit like glass. In a hard impact, mechanical forces concentrate at the corners of the beams and they can crack. So, my research question is straightforward. Can we reshape these structures to prevent any crack without compromising the sensor performance? Instead of smashing real sensors all day, I developed a computer program that replicates a drop test. I model a sensor and apply a sharp pulse of acceleration like the one it would feel on impact. In the computer program, instead of creating random designs, the beams are described using smooth curves, and I let the computer evolve better shapes. To do so, I use genetic algorithm. It sounds like a mouthful, but it's just a computer program inspired by a very famous mechanism called natural selection. The genetic algorithm creates many individual shapes, tests each one using a simulation software, and after just less than half an hour, I get very interesting shapes a human might take hours or even days to come up with. The result seems great. In the old design, mechanical forces are packed into tiny regions at the corners. In the new design, however, the sharp corners are turned into smooth curves, so the bending forces are spread out along longer sections. As a result, the new sensors are now at least twice as tough and much harder to break in an impact or a fall. So, Next time you drop your cell phone on the floor and it still works, maybe shapes like these are quietly helping to save your $2,000 smartphone. Thank you.
What if I told you that the future of clean, renewable energy could start in the toilet? What we usually think of as waste can actually be used as an energy source, thanks to these teeny tiny microbes living inside of these systems called the anaerobic digester. These microbes break down waste and release methane, a gas that can be used to heat homes and power communities. Now, I want you to close your eyes and imagine a small town in the middle of the Arctic. The roads are buried in snow and the lake is frozen solid. At the center of the town is a fireplace burning, keeping the communities warm and alive. Now imagine that that town is microscopic. In every anaerobic digester is a small community of microbes. Each member of the community breaks down complex waste into smaller pieces, which are then passed on from one group to another until it reaches a group called the methanogens, who take all of the remaining waste and convert it into methane gas, the fuel that keeps the fire burning. But as the cold sets in and a gust of wind blows out the fire, their activity slows down. Some become dormant and the digestion process can come to a stall. Untreated waste begins to accumulate, increasing the risk of harmful pathogens reaching the human communities who depend on these systems. But what if there's a super species of microbes who we can recruit who love the cold? Could they be the solution to keeping this microscopic town running? Well, this summer, I'm headed off to Yukon in search for these super species of microbes. I'll be collecting samples from a cold climate digester where I'll be reading their DNA and seeing who's present, what jobs they're performing, how good they are at those jobs, and how they interact with each other to support each other through the digestion process. Then I'll be bringing them home with me to the lab so I can recreate these cold climate communities and find out more about what their favorite foods are, see how much gas they can produce, and see whether these cold climate digesters can knock out those pesky pathogens. I want to learn more about who these super species are and how I can work with them, because if we can strengthen this microscopic community and keep them healthy and strong, then we can help to protect a family from the Arctic, from untreated waste, and give them some energy to heat their homes and to cook a home-cooked meal. Thank you. Okay. I forgot I have to give this to you.
In 2022, over 28,000 people in BC experienced homelessness, about 0.5% of all British Columbians. People experiencing homelessness face stigma and poor health outcomes. Moreover, they typically access emergency services far more than housed individuals. Hence, finding and preventing homelessness would benefit the entire healthcare system and everyone it serves. In collaboration with a public health officer, my project's goal is to identify which patients serviced by Vancouver Coastal Health have experienced homelessness. The cohort allows us to characterize their socio-demographics and medical problems, enabling 3 rights. The right preventative measure can be administered to the right patient at the right time and place, minimizing the likelihood they end up in a hospital bed. To identify the cohort, we use patient health records to train machine learning models that classify patients as having experienced homelessness or not. To promote interpretability, the data is first transformed into intelligent features, clinically motivated quantities that are predictive of homelessness. For instance, as you can see in the graphs on your left, unhoused individuals typically have more emergency visits, more addresses, and less consistency in address between successive emergency visits than housed individuals. As a mathematician, my role on the team is to quantify verbal models like address inconsistency, impute missing data, and develop software to train and test the machine learning models. To assess model performance, note Vancouver Coastal Health already has methods of indicating homelessness in the electronic medical records, such as an address being no fixed address or an address being a shelter. Among these patients, our models correctly classify about 90% of them as having experienced homelessness. The models also learned, without being explicitly taught, that homelessness concentrates in the downtown east side, just 1 bus ride along Hastings Street from SFU's main campus. We also performed gender analyses and found that the original models were very biased towards men. The initial models were about 13% less accurate at identifying unhoused females than unhoused males. To mitigate this, we trained female-only models, models on female-only data, and reduced the inaccuracy by about 1/2. Our research adopts the learning health system paradigm and is a collaboration between SFU scientists, public health, Vancouver Coastal Health Public Health, and data and analytics, ensuring that the public health has set the project goals, ensuring that research output has an operational use case, while data and analytics has guided the data and software development in methods that are implementable on their servers, ensuring that after the conclusion of my thesis, our models can be sustainably deployed to identify who is experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
we go. Okay. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be Alice down in Wonderland and you find a piece of cake that says, "Eat me," so you grow so large that trees look like broccoli and lakes look like puddles? Well, I think about it all the time because I study rivers with canyons, where water is very deep and very fast. It would be a much more accessible workplace if I could just grow like Alice and wade right through them. But luckily, I'm going to tell you exactly how I get to do that today. But why do we care about how rivers work? Well, they're actually artists of entire landscapes. They sculpt statues out of mountains across our planet. And they do so not just with the flowing water in them, but also their sediment. This is the sand, gravel, and rocks. The way these particles move and erode against the river's boundaries is what ultimately can create things like wide valleys and deep canyons. And this is what a lot of river research is after. Modeling how sediment moves can tell us how Earth's terrain evolves over eons of time. But many models neglect natural variability. For example, river width can expand and contract repeatedly, creating distinct wide and narrow segments with lots of wiggles in between. And this is what I'm after. How does that width variability affect the way the sediment is moving, especially in a river with a canyon in it? So, like Alice used her imagination to create a whole world, I was able to create a river in something called a flume. I built 2 wide segments with a canyon in between, and I was able to change how much that canyon width wiggled. I also controlled how much water was flowing through, and I fed sediment from the upstream end to mimic a real river. And what I found is that width has a very strong influence on how sediment is organized. In these 2 3D images of my canyon on the right, we have straight walls, and we see a very simple, uniform bed of sediment on the bottom. But once on the right, I introduced some wiggles into the walls, we see that sediment is dramatically reorganized. Tighter areas will speed up flows and carve deep pools into the bed, pushing sediment out and away to find slower, more comfortable water in the wider sections. Those deep pools are where the river may carve and cut into the earth more and more over time. I was also able to show how the one reach communicates with another, not just operating independently. And this created a sort of downstream domino effect where the upstream wide bed would grow and build its sediment bed over time in order to pass sediment downstream to the canyon in order to do the same. So through this journey into my wonderland, we see that sediment not only creates a river shape, but the river shape in turn directs the path of the sediment. And it's this reciprocal relationship that over very long periods of time is what tells us when, where, and how rivers are cutting into Earth's surface.
All right. All right. There we go. Thank you to our 14 presenters. Together, you demonstrate the remarkable breadth and diversity of research taking place at SFU. Now, it's up to the judges to select the runner-up and the SFU 3MT finalist. This is no easy feat, given the strength of today's presentations. And as audience members, you have a tough choice as well. Shortly, you'll see a QR code on the screen that will allow you to cast your People's Choice vote. You have 10 minutes to do so. Once you've voted, please enjoy light refreshments in the atrium and ask the finalists questions that you might have thought of during the presentations. Remember though, don't leave yet. Have your snacks, but please plan to come back. We'll announce the winners following the break. Thank you, and we'll see you shortly. Okay, are we ready? Excellent. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the break. We'll now move into announcing the results for this year's 3MT finals. I have to say, though, you might have noted that it took us a while. It really took us a while because you were all so excellent. Really, your presentations were wonderful. And there was even some mention of arm wrestling because it was so hard to make the decision. So anyway, really fantastic. Thank you all for your great work. Okay, so as your name is called, please come up. We'll give you your award and we'll take a picture. So the runner-up in the 2026 3MT final from SFU is Maggie Koo. Unfortunately, Maggie had to leave and is unavailable to join us right now. Okay, but the other people, of course, are here. The winner of the 2026 SFU finals, who will represent SFU at the University of Regina on Monday, May 4th, is Jonas Eschenfelder. And lastly, we have the People's Choice Award winner. And the winner is Grace Johnson. I'd like to thank the judges. Please join me in thanking them. Just a few more things before we go. This was truly outstanding and inspirational work. If you had been in the room while we were discussing things, you would have heard just the wonderful things that everyone had to say about the work you've done. It's through events like this that we can connect the incredible work being done by our individual graduate students and their faculties to the larger community of learning here at SFU. Not only does the work you do benefit our university, but it also helps those who participate to learn the skills that they can carry forward into their academic lives and their professional lives beyond academia. Marianne let us know just how much she's relied on the skills that she learned in doing the 3MT in her everyday life. Speaking of supporting our amazing graduate students, we'd like to share that we have a graduate student scholarship that just happens to be accepting donations. So if you're interested in contributing, every donation, no matter the size, goes directly to supporting scholarships for our hardworking graduate students and ensures that their research continues to make a difference, as you've witnessed today. Today, we were able to celebrate the achievements of each of these students and SFU as a whole. Congratulations to everyone. And on that note, thank you all for participating in this year's 3MT finals, and a special thank you once again to our judges. Please join me in a final round of applause for our 3MT finalists. Okay, and one final thanks to our Vice President Research Office for the prizes. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a nice evening.